The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1883, informing Natalie Edwards that her husband-to-be had died 3 days prior, though by the time she read those words, he had already been in the ground for over a week. She stood in her father's study in Philadelphia, the paper trembling between her gloved fingers, and felt the peculiar sensation of mourning a man she had never met, but had agreed to marry through correspondence spanning 6 months. Douglas Zimmerman had written her letters filled with descriptions of Nevada's stark beauty, the silver mines that promised prosperity, and the little house he was building for their life together in McGill. Now there would be no life, no marriage, no future in that distant desert town she had spent countless nights imagining. Her father urged her to stay, to forget the whole foolish arrangement, but something stubborn and perhaps reckless had taken root in Natalie's heart during those months of letters. She had sold her mother's pearl necklace to finance the journey, had already said her goodbyes to the life she knew, and more than that, she felt she owed Douglas something. He had written of his loneliness, of how her letters brought light to his evenings after long days in the mines, of how he had fallen in love with her words and her photograph. The least she could do was visit his grave, pay her respects to the ghost of what might have been. The journey west took 14 days by train and stagecoach, each mile carrying her further from everything familiar. Natalie watched the landscape transform through the window, the green giving way to brown, the cities to small towns, and finally to vast stretches of nothing punctuated by rock and sage. She traveled with a small trunk containing 3 dresses, her writing materials, what remained of her money, and Douglas's letters tied with a blue ribbon. The other passengers changed at various stops, but she remained, always heading west, always toward McGill. The stagecoach deposited her in front of McGill's general store on a Friday afternoon, when the October sun still held summer's heat. Dust coated everything, and the town looked smaller than she had imagined, more fragile against the massive brown mountains that surrounded it. A dozen wooden buildings lined the main street, and she could hear the distant sounds of the copper mine that had recently begun supplementing the silver operations Douglas had written about. Men in work clothes moved along the wooden sidewalks, and several stopped to stare at the young woman in a traveling dress standing beside her trunk, clearly out of place. Natalie approached an older woman sweeping the porch of what appeared to be a boarding house. "Excuse me, could you direct me to the cemetery?" The woman's eyes widened. "You just arrived and you're asking about the boneyard." "I came to pay respects to Douglas Zimmerman. I was meant to be his wife." The woman's expression softened with pity. "Oh, honey, you came all this way." "That's a tragedy, it truly is. The cemetery's up the hill past the church, but there's something you should know." She paused, glancing up the street. "Maybe you ought to talk to Doc Hensley first. He's in his office 2 doors down, the sign's clear enough." Confused but too weary to argue, Natalie left her trunk with the woman's promise to watch it and walked to the doctor's office. The interior was dim and smelled of carbolic acid and something herbal she could not identify. A man emerged from a back room, middle-aged with graying hair and tired eyes that seemed to have witnessed too much suffering. "I'm looking for information about Douglas Zimmerman," Natalie said. "I was told you might help me understand what happened." Doc Hensley's face went through several expressions before settling on bewilderment. "Who told you Douglas was dead?" "I received a telegram 2 weeks ago. It said he had died and been buried." The doctor removed his spectacles and cleaned them on his vest, a gesture that seemed designed to buy time. "Miss, there's been a terrible mistake. Douglas Zimmerman nearly died. He was caught in a mine collapse, trapped for hours, and when we pulled him out, His injuries were so severe I wasn't certain he would survive the night. I dictated a telegram to his employer to send to his next of kin. His brother, I thought, or perhaps a cousin back east. I may have mentioned that someone should be notified because we expected the worst. Natalie's heart began to pound. He's alive, though not in good condition. The collapse crushed his left leg, broke several ribs, and he suffered a severe blow to the head. He's been in and out of consciousness for nearly 2 weeks. I've done what I can, but he needs rest and time. Who are you to him, if I may ask? We were to be married. I received a telegram saying he had died, that he had been buried. I came to see his grave. Doc Hensley shook his head slowly. Someone made an error, or perhaps sent that telegram prematurely. Douglas is upstairs in the room I keep for patients who need watching. He woke this morning and spoke a few words. He asked about the date, seemed agitated about time passing. Would you like to see him? The staircase creaked under her feet as she followed the doctor to the second floor. Her mind reeled with the impossibility of it all. She had traveled 14 days expecting to find a grave, and instead, she would meet her intended husband while he lay broken in a sick bed. What did one say in such circumstances? How did one introduce herself as the bride-to-be to a man who had nearly died, who might still die? The room was small and spare, containing a bed, a chair, and a washstand. The man in the bed looked nothing like the confident figure in the photograph he had sent her. His face was bruised and gaunt, his left leg elevated and splinted, bandages visible beneath his nightshirt. But his eyes were open, blue and clear, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. "Douglas Zimmerman, you have a visitor," Doc Hensley said gently. "This young lady has come a very long way to see you." Douglas tried to sit up and failed, wincing with pain. "I don't understand." Natalie moved closer, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking. "My name is Natalie Edwards. You wrote to me. We were meant to marry when I arrived in McGill." She watched him struggle to process this information, his brow furrowing. "Natalie, you're here." "But I wrote to you 3 weeks ago, telling you not to come yet, that the house was not finished." "I never received that letter. I received a telegram saying you had died. It said you had been buried. I came to pay my respects." Something passed across his face, an emotion too complex to name. "You traveled all this way thinking I was dead. I felt I owed you that much. Your letters meant something to me. You meant something to me, even though we had never met." Doc Hensley cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to talk. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." He slipped out, closing the door most of the way but leaving it slightly ajar for propriety's sake. The silence stretched between them, awkward and loaded with things neither knew how to say. Douglas looked at her as if she were a mirage that might vanish at any moment. "I must look a fright." "You look like a man who survived a mine collapse." Natalie pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. "The doctor says you're fortunate to be alive." "I don't feel particularly fortunate at the moment." He attempted a smile, but it turned into a grimace. "This is not how I imagined our first meeting. I had planned to clean up the house, to have everything ready, to meet you at the stage looking presentable. Instead, you find me like this. Life rarely goes according to plan, it seems." She studied his face, looking for the man she had come to know through his letters. "In your last letter, the one I did receive, you wrote about the sunset over the mountains, how the whole world turned gold for a few minutes every evening. You said you imagined watching it with me." His expression softened. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you wrote. I read your letters so many times I could recite them." "Then you know I'm not a man of means. I'm a miner with a half-built house and now a damaged leg that may never work properly again." The doctor won't say it directly, but I can see it in his face. "I may not be able to go back into the mines." I didn't travel 1,400 miles expecting luxury, Douglas. I came because your letters showed me a good man, an honest man, someone who saw beauty in harsh places and who was not afraid to admit loneliness. That man is worth the journey, regardless of what the future holds. He looked away, and she thought she saw moisture in his eyes. You should not have come. You should go back to Philadelphia, find someone whole, someone who can provide for you properly. That's not your decision to make. She spoke more sharply than she intended. I am here, and I will not be sent away simply because circumstances have changed. Unless you tell me you do not want me here, that you have changed your mind about our arrangement, I intend to stay. Changed my mind. Natalie, I thought I was dying in that mine. The last coherent thought I had was regret that I would never meet you, never hear your voice, never see if your eyes truly were as green as your photograph suggested. They're greener, actually. You're more beautiful than I imagined, and I imagined quite a lot. Heat rose in her cheeks. You're delirious from the injury. I'm clear-headed for the first time in 2 weeks, and I'm telling you the truth. But I'm also telling you the truth when I say you deserve better than a broken-down miner who might not walk properly again. Then I suppose it's fortunate that you don't get to decide what I deserve. She reached out and took his hand, the first physical contact between them. His hand was rough with calluses, warm, and it closed around hers with surprising strength. I traveled 14 days to marry a man already buried. The least you can do is stay alive and give me the chance to know you properly. A real smile crossed his face this time, transforming it despite the bruises and exhaustion. You're stubborn, determined. There's a difference. Is there? Stubborn implies irrationality. Determination implies purpose. And what is your purpose, Natalie Edwards? She met his eyes directly. Right now, to ensure you recover. Beyond that, we'll have to see. We're not exactly starting our acquaintance under typical circumstances. Over the following days, Natalie established herself in McGill. She took a room at the boarding house run by the woman who had first directed her, a kind widow named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had been among the first Chinese immigrants to work the Nevada mines. The town was small enough that everyone knew about the bride who had arrived for a dead man and found him alive within hours. Some thought it romantic, others thought it strange, but most simply accepted it as the sort of peculiar circumstance that defined life in mining towns where fortune and disaster walked hand in hand. Every morning, Natalie visited Douglas in Doc Hensley's office. She would read to him from the newspapers she bought at the general store, or from the single book she had brought with her, a volume of Whitman's poetry that Douglas confessed he had never read, but found he enjoyed when she read it aloud. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about Philadelphia, about her childhood as the only daughter of a widowed merchant who had doted on her, until his business failed, and death claimed him 6 months before Douglas's first letter arrived. He told her about growing up in Ohio, about the death of his parents to cholera, about his younger brother who had died of fever during the war, about how he had come west seeking not fortune but simply a place where the past did not follow him so closely. I was lonely, he admitted one afternoon. I worked alongside other men, lived in boarding houses and mining camps, but I was lonely in a way that company could not fix. I wanted someone to know me, truly know me. A friend from the Ohio mines had married through correspondence, and he spoke highly of the experience. So I placed an advertisement and you responded. I was lonely too, Natalie confessed. After my father died, I lived with his sister, a bitter woman who treated me like an unwanted obligation. I saw my life stretching ahead, years of being a dependent spinster, useful only for mending and housekeeping. Your advertisement offered something different, An adventure, perhaps, certainly a change. Did you expect to fall in love through letters? I don't know what I expected. I thought perhaps we might build affection over time, that shared experience and commitment would create something meaningful. Did you? Douglas shifted in the bed, still unable to move without pain. I fell a little in love with your first letter. You wrote about watching the rain and finding it beautiful rather than dreary. You said every raindrop was a small act of renewal. I had never heard anyone speak of rain that way. I thought, this is someone who sees the world differently, someone worth knowing. I was trying to sound poetic and probably came across as ridiculous. You came across as genuine. That's rarer than poetry. By the end of the second week of Natalie's arrival in McGill, Douglas was able to sit up in bed and even stand for brief moments with assistance, though the pain in his leg remained severe. Doc Hensley explained that the bones were healing, but the damage to the muscles and tendons was extensive. Douglas would walk again, but likely with a permanent limp, and heavy labor like mining was out of the question. "What will you do?" Natalie asked him one evening. The sun was setting beyond the window, turning the world gold just as he had described in his letters. "I've been thinking about that. I'm a fair hand with carpentry, and I know mining inside and out. Perhaps I could do contract work, building supports and structures for the mine companies without having to go deep underground, or I might find work with the railroad. They're always expanding through this territory. A man who knows his way around timber and tools can find employment. What about your house? You wrote that you were building it yourself. It's half finished. The frame is up, the roof is on, but the interior work remains. I had hoped to complete it before you arrived." He looked at her, his expression uncertain. "I don't know what to do about us, Natalie. We made an agreement, but everything has changed." "Has it? We're both still here. We're both still unattached. We've spent 2 weeks getting to know each other, which is more than many couples have before marriage. But you deserve a proper courtship, time to be certain, the chance to change your mind." "I could have changed my mind any time in the past 2 weeks. I could have taken the next stage east. I'm still here." Out of pity, perhaps, that sparked her temper. "Don't insult me by suggesting I'm motivated by pity. I stayed because I want to stay, because I like talking with you, because I think we might actually build something worthwhile together. But if you don't want that, if you've changed your mind, then say so directly instead of making decisions for me." "I haven't changed my mind. God help me, I want you to stay more than I've wanted anything in years, but I need you to be certain. Take your time. We can extend our courtship for as long as you need." "How long did you have in mind?" "I don't know. A few months, however long feels right." Natalie considered this. "I came here to marry you. I've spent 2 weeks learning that you're exactly the man your letters suggested, kind and thoughtful and perhaps too concerned with doing the right thing. I don't need months to know my mind, but if you need time to feel confident in this, then we'll take time. You're remarkable, do you know that? I'm practical. There's a difference." The next morning, Doc Hensley declared Douglas well enough to leave his care, provided he rested and did not attempt anything strenuous for at least another month. Natalie helped him down the stairs, supporting his weight as he navigated each step with gritted teeth and determination. She had arranged for a wagon to take them to his house on the edge of town, where Mrs. Chen had already delivered some basic supplies at Natalie's request. The house stood against the bare hillside, small but solidly built, its unpainted wood still bright and fresh. Douglas had been right that it was unfinished. The main room had a fireplace and rough plank flooring, but the walls were bare studs in places, and the 2 smaller rooms in the back were completely unfinished. Still, it had potential, and more importantly, it was theirs. "I know it's not much," Douglas said as she helped him through the door. It's more than I had in Philadelphia. Mrs. Chen's nephew is a carpenter. I've spoken with him about finishing the interior work. You can supervise and he can provide the labor until you're stronger. I can't afford to pay a carpenter. I can. I have some money left from the sale of my mother's jewelry, and I've been managing it carefully. This seems like a good use for it. Natalie, I can't let you do that. Why not? If we're to be married, what's mine will be yours and vice versa. We might as well start thinking that way now. He sank into the one chair in the room, clearly exhausted from the short journey. You've thought of everything. Someone has to. You've been busy recovering from nearly dying. Over the following weeks, the house slowly took shape. Mrs. Chen's nephew, a capable young man named Thomas, worked on the interior walls and installed proper windows while Douglas sat in his chair offering advice and occasionally assistance with lighter tasks. Natalie divided her time between helping with the house and working at the general store, where the owner had hired her to manage accounts and inventory after discovering she had a head for numbers and organization. McGill itself was growing rapidly. The copper deposits in the nearby mountains had proven rich, and the mining company was bringing in more workers every week. New businesses opened, including a proper restaurant and a small hotel. The town that had seemed so small and fragile when Natalie arrived was transforming into something more substantial, more permanent. One evening in late November, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival, Natalie and Douglas sat together on the porch he had finally finished building. The desert air was cold now, winter asserting itself in the high country, but they had blankets and the companionship was warm. Douglas was walking better, though the limp was pronounced and likely permanent. He had secured contract work with the mining company, designing and overseeing the construction of new surface structures, work that paid reasonably and did not require him to go underground. I think we should set a date, Douglas said quietly. Natalie looked at him in the dim light from the house behind them. Are you certain? I've been certain since you told me you traveled 14 days thinking I was dead. That kind of commitment deserves to be honored. I love you, Natalie. I think I loved you from your letters, but now I know you, and I love you even more. The question is whether you feel the same. She had been waiting for him to say those words, but hearing them still made her heart race. I love you too. I think it started in your letters, in the way you described seeing beauty in harsh places, in your honesty about loneliness. But getting to know you these past weeks, seeing your determination to heal, your concern for doing right by me even when it would be easier not to, watching you design structures with such careful thought, all of that has deepened what I feel. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to build a life here with you. He reached for her hand, and she gave it to him. December 15th. That gives us time to arrange things properly to have a small celebration. I want everyone to know that you chose me, that this is not just an arrangement of convenience but a real marriage built on real feeling. December 15th, she agreed. That's perfect. The preparations were simpler than a wedding in Philadelphia would have been, but no less meaningful. Mrs. Chen helped Natalie alter one of her better dresses, adding lace at the collar and cuffs. Douglas ordered a new suit from the catalog at the general store, his first store-bought clothing in years. The minister who traveled between the small mining towns agreed to perform the ceremony in the newly completed main room of their house. They invited the small community they had come to know, perhaps 20 people in all, but it felt right. On the morning of December 15th, 1883, Natalie woke in her room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house for the last time. The older woman had become a friend, and she helped Natalie dress and pin her hair with a care that reminded Natalie of her own mother. You're making the right choice, Mrs. Chen said softly. I see how he looks at you and how you look at him. That's worth more than comfort or security, though I think you'll have those too. I'm nervous, Natalie admitted. Not about marrying Douglas, but about everything it means. We're really starting our lives today. Everything that came before was just preparation. All marriages are leaps of faith, dear. But you two have already weathered more strangeness than most couples face in years. If you can handle a woman arriving for a funeral and finding a wedding instead, you can handle whatever else comes. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Douglas stood without aid, though Natalie could see the effort it cost him, his weight carefully balanced on his good leg. His eyes never left her face as she walked to stand beside him. The minister spoke about commitment and partnership, about building a life together through both fortune and hardship. When it came time for the vows, Douglas's voice was strong and clear. I promise to honor you, to be honest with you, to work alongside you in building our life together. I promise to see you, truly see you every day, and to never take for granted the miracle of your presence in my life. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes as she responded. I promise to stand with you, to support you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to choose you every day, just as I chose you today. I promise to build a home with you, not just a house, but a place where we both belong. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Douglas kissed her gently, a kiss that held promise and tenderness, and the beginning of something neither could fully imagine yet. The small gathering applauded, and then there was food and conversation and laughter that filled the house with warmth, despite the cold December wind outside. As evening fell and their guests departed, Natalie and Douglas found themselves alone in their home for the first time as a married couple. The nervousness that had faded during the celebration returned, different now, charged with anticipation and uncertainty. I can sleep in the back room if you're not ready, Douglas offered quietly. I know this has all been unconventional. We're married now. I didn't travel 14 days and wait 2 months to sleep in separate rooms. She moved closer to him, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken under her palm. I'm nervous, but I want this. I want you. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. I'll be careful of you, I promise. I know you will. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and sweet, a fumbling discovery of each other in the darkness of their bedroom. Douglas was gentle, mindful of her inexperience and his own physical limitations. Natalie found herself surprised by the intimacy of it. Not just the physical joining, but the emotional vulnerability, the trust required to be completely open to another person. Afterward, they lay together in the narrow bed, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, and talked quietly about the future they would build. Winter in McGill was harsh, with winds that howled down from the mountains and snow that sometimes lasted for days. But the house was warm, and Natalie found she did not mind the isolation. She continued her work at the general store 3 days a week, and Douglas spent his days at the mine site, overseeing construction projects. In the evenings, they cooked together, read together, and gradually learned the rhythms of married life. They had disagreements, of course. Natalie thought Douglas too willing to take on extra work, even when his leg pained him, and he thought she too frugal with money they could afford to spend on small comforts. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise, to apologize when wrong. The foundation of their correspondence, that willingness to be honest and vulnerable with each other, served them well in navigating the complexities of daily life together. Spring arrived late in the high desert, but when it came, it transformed the brown landscape with sudden bursts of wildflowers and green. Natalie discovered she was pregnant in April, and the joy on Douglas's face when she told him made her cry happy tears. He immediately became protective, insisting she reduce her hours at the store, wanting her to rest more to take better care of herself. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she reminded him, amused and touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while continuing to work and live their lives. But you're my wife, carrying my child. Let me fuss over you a little. A little is acceptable. Treating me like fragile china is not." Their son was born in late December of 1884, just over a year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Douglas feared he might lose both wife and child. But Natalie proved as determined in childbirth as in everything else, and finally, the baby's cry filled their bedroom, strong and healthy. They named him David, after Douglas's father, and the baby had his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Parenthood changed them in ways both expected and surprising. Douglas, who had been so concerned about his ability to provide, proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with a crying baby despite his bad leg, changing nappies without complaint, singing off key lullabies that somehow always worked. Natalie, who had wondered if maternal feeling would come naturally, found herself fiercely protective and deeply in love with this small person they had created. McGill continued to grow, and with it, opportunities expanded. Douglas's reputation for solid, innovative design work spread, and he began receiving offers from mining operations throughout the region. He could have traveled to take these jobs, made more money, but he chose to stay close to home, to be present for his family. Natalie's organizational skills led to a partnership in the general store, and she slowly built a small savings account for emergencies and future needs. Their second child, a daughter they named Nora, arrived in the spring of 1887. She was smaller than David had been, but just as healthy, with her father's blue eyes and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. David, now 2 years old, was initially skeptical of this new person who commanded so much attention but gradually warmed to his role as big brother. One evening in the summer of 1887, when David was asleep and Nora nursed contentedly, Douglas and Natalie sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. It had become a ritual, this evening time together, a way to reconnect after busy days. "You ever regret it?" Douglas asked quietly. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up whatever life you might have had back east?" Natalie looked at him, this man she had traveled so far to find, who had been both dead and alive when she arrived, who had become her husband, the father of her children, her partner in building this life. "Not for a single moment, do you?" "Never." "I think about that telegram, the one that brought you here thinking I was dead. It was a mistake, an error in communication, but it feels like fate somehow. Like the universe conspired to bring you to me even when circumstances suggested it was impossible. I prefer to think we made our own fate. I chose to come. You chose to give us a chance despite your injuries. We both chose to stay, to commit, to build this life together. That's not fate, that's determination." "Determination," he repeated, smiling at the echo of their first real conversation. "You were right about that, you know. There is a difference between stubborn and determined." "I'm usually right," she said with mock seriousness. "You should have learned that by now." He laughed and pulled her closer, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "I learn it every day. I'm a slow student, but I'm teachable." As the years passed, their family and their fortunes grew steadily. David proved to be a serious child, thoughtful and curious, always asking questions about how things worked. Nora was sunshine personified, making friends wherever she went, seeing the good in everyone. In 1889, they welcomed twin boys, James and Joseph, who were handfuls from birth, full of energy and mischief. The house had to be expanded, and Douglas did much of the work himself, his bad leg no longer bothering him as much after years of adaptation. McGill evolved from a rough mining camp into a proper town with schools, churches, civic organizations, and even cultural events. Natalie served on the school board and helped organize a lending library, fulfilling her love of reading by making books accessible to the whole community. Douglas became known as the best structural engineer in the region, and young men apprenticed with him to learn his methods. Their marriage deepened with time, moving beyond the passionate discovery of early years into something richer and more complex. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance, finished each other's sentences. They still disagreed sometimes, still had to work through conflicts, but the foundation they had built through letters and those early days of uncertainty held firm. In the spring of 1895, 12 years after Natalie's arrival in McGill, they stood together at the cemetery where she had come to find Douglas's grave. They were not there to mourn, but to oversee the placement of a memorial stone for the miners who had died in the collapse that had nearly killed Douglas. Several families had contributed to the monument, and Douglas had designed it, a simple but elegant marker of native stone with each man's name carefully carved. "I think about them sometimes," Douglas said quietly, looking at the names. "The men who died when I lived. There's no reason I survived when they didn't. It was luck, chance, fate, whatever you want to call it." "Perhaps it was chance," Natalie agreed. "But what you did with that second chance, that was choice. You could have given up when I arrived and you were broken and unsure. Instead, you chose to live fully, to build something meaningful. That honors them too, in a way. I had help. I had you. We had each other." That evening, they hosted a dinner at their expanded home for the families of the men remembered on the monument. It was bittersweet, this gathering of people marked by loss but also by resilience. Stories were shared, tears and laughter mingled, and children who had never known their fathers played together in the yard. As Natalie moved through the rooms refilling cups and ensuring everyone had enough to eat, she felt a deep sense of rightness. This was what home meant, not just a place but a community, people bound together by shared experience and mutual support. Later, after everyone had left and the children were in bed, she found Douglas standing in David's room, looking down at their sleeping eldest son. The boy was nearly 11 now, growing tall, his features taking on the angular planes that would define his adult face. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That we gave them a good life. A stable home, opportunities, love. That's more than I had, more than you had after your father died. We broke the pattern. We did. And they'll carry that forward, build their own lives from this foundation." He turned to her, his expression serious. "I never thanked you properly. For what? For coming. For staying. For choosing me every day since that first day. For building this life with me. For being exactly who you are." She moved into his arms, fitting against him with the ease of long practice. "You don't need to thank me. I got everything I hoped for and more than I imagined. I traveled 14 days to marry a man already buried, and instead, I found a life beyond what I thought possible. That's not something that requires thanks. That's something that requires gratitude to whatever force brought us together. I thought I was still standing just barely when you arrived. I thought surviving the collapse was the miracle. But the real miracle was you walking through Doc Hensley's door and choosing to stay. We were both lucky. Let's not waste time trying to figure out who benefited more. Let's just keep choosing each other, keep building this life, keep being grateful for every day we have." He kissed her then, a kiss that held 12 years of shared history, of challenges overcome, of joys celebrated, of a partnership forged through honesty and commitment. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of ordinary moments and occasional dramatic events. David left for university in California in 1900, the first in either family to pursue higher education, planning to study engineering like his father. Nora, at 13, was already showing signs of becoming a teacher, patient with her younger brothers and endlessly curious about the world. The twins, now 11, were still handfuls but beginning to show distinct personalities. James more cautious and artistic, Joseph bold and mechanically inclined. In 1902, a fire swept through part of McGill during a dry August, destroying several businesses including the general store where Natalie had worked for years. She and her business partner, now a dear friend, rebuilt from insurance money and savings, designing a larger, better organized space that became the commercial heart of town. Douglas supervised the construction, incorporating fire-resistant design elements that were ahead of their time. The rebuilding process brought the community together in ways both practical and emotional. Neighbors helped neighbors, supplies were shared, and a sense of collective purpose emerged. Natalie and Douglas, now in their 40s and established as community leaders, found themselves guiding not just the physical reconstruction, but the emotional recovery as well. One night, exhausted from a long day of coordinating construction efforts, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The house was quiet, the younger children staying with friends while David was away at school and Nora was visiting her aunt in Utah. "We've been married nearly 19 years, Douglas said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday you walked through that door and I thought I was hallucinating. Other times it feels like we've always been together, like there was never a time before us." "I know what you mean. The life I had before McGill feels like it happened to someone else. That woman who boarded the train in Philadelphia, she's not quite me anymore. Do you miss her, that version of yourself?" Natalie considered the question carefully. "No. She was brave to come west, but she was also running from a life that felt like a trap. I'm not running anymore. I'm exactly where I choose to be. Even after all the hardships, the difficulties of frontier life, the fire, the times money was tight, all of it, especially after all that. Those experiences shaped us, brought us closer, made us stronger. Easy lives don't build character, and they certainly don't build the kind of partnership we have. I wouldn't trade what we've built for an easier path." Douglas reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern of her wedding ring. "I love you more now than when we married. I didn't think that was possible, but it's true. You're not just my wife, you're my best friend, my partner, the person who makes sense of everything. I love you too, more than words can adequately express. You're the man I chose to travel 14 days to find, even if I thought I was looking for a grave. You're the man who said I'm still standing when everything seemed impossible. And you're the man I'll keep choosing for as long as we both live." They sat together as darkness fell completely, watching the stars emerge in the clear Nevada sky. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the daily tasks that composed a life. But tonight, they simply existed in this moment of peace and connection, grateful for the impossible journey that had brought them together and the determination that had kept them building something beautiful in this harsh, unforgiving, magnificent place they had learned to call home. David returned from university in 1904 with a degree in civil engineering and plans to work for the railroad, designing bridges and tunnels through the western mountains. He met a young woman in California, a school teacher named Sarah, and brought her home to meet his parents. The wedding was held in McGill in the spring of 1905, and watching her son marry with such confidence and joy, Natalie thought about her own unconventional beginning and felt grateful that David had an easier path to love. Nora followed her passion for teaching and took a position at the expanded McGill School in 1906, working with the youngest students. She had her mother's patience and her father's ability to explain complex concepts simply. The town's children adored her, and parents valued her dedication. In 1908, she married a mining engineer named Robert Cross, who shared her love of reading and had a quiet strength that balanced her exuberance perfectly. The twins took different paths, as everyone had expected. James apprenticed with a silversmith in Carson City, his artistic nature finding expression in creating beautiful objects from Nevada's most precious metal. Joseph stayed in McGill and worked with his father, learning structural engineering with an intuitive grasp that surprised and pleased Douglas. By 1910, they worked as equal partners, Zimmerman and Son appearing on project specifications throughout the region. As Natalie and Douglas entered their 50s, they found themselves with the house slowly emptying, becoming grandparents, transitioning from the active phase of raising children to the reflective phase of watching their children raise families of their own. It was strange and sometimes lonely, but it also created space for them to rediscover each other without the constant demands of young children. They took trips together, visiting David in California, spending time in Carson City with James, traveling to Salt Lake City, just for the experience of seeing somewhere new. They renovated their house again, this time creating space for visits from grandchildren rather than room for their own growing family. They invested in the community they had helped build, supporting the library, the school, the church, and various civic improvements. In 1912, nearly 30 years after Natalie's arrival, McGill held a celebration marking its transformation from mining camp to incorporated town with a population of over 2,000. Natalie and Douglas were honored as pioneer citizens, recognized for their contributions to the community's development. Standing before the crowd gathered in the new town square, Douglas gave a brief speech that surprised his wife with its emotion. "When I came to Nevada 40 years ago, I was running from loss and looking for work. I found both employment and more loss when the mine collapse nearly killed me. But from that devastation came the greatest gift of my life. My wife traveled 14 days across the country thinking she was coming to bury me, only to find me broken but alive. She could have left, should have left by any rational measure, but she stayed. Together, we built not just a house but a home, not just a marriage but a partnership, not just a family but a legacy. McGill has been good to us, and we have tried to be good to McGill in return. Thank you for this honor, and thank you for being the community that welcomed a mail-order bride and a nearly dead miner, and let us become part of something larger than ourselves." The applause was thunderous, and Natalie felt tears streaming down her face. Later, people came to them with stories, sharing how their marriage had inspired others, how their commitment to community had made McGill a better place, how their children reflected their values. It was overwhelming and humbling. That night, alone in their bedroom, Douglas held her close. "Did I embarrass you with that speech? You moved me. There's a difference." She smiled through lingering tears. "I'm proud of us, of what we've built, not just the tangible things but the intangible ones, the love, the trust, the partnership. We started from letters and faith and somehow created all of this. The letters were important. They gave us a foundation of honesty to build on. We knew each other's thoughts and dreams before we ever met. That mattered. It did. But it was the choice to keep choosing each other, even when it was difficult, that really built our marriage. The letters started it, but the daily commitment sustained it. As they approached their 30th wedding anniversary in December of 1913, their children planned a celebration that brought the family together in McGill for a week. David came with Sarah and their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from 7 to 3 years old. Nora and Robert brought their infant son, David's namesake. James traveled from Carson City with his new wife, a vibrant woman named Clara who shared his artistic sensibility. Joseph, still living in McGill with his wife Alina, had 2 daughters who were the lights of their grandparents' lives. The house that had once seemed too small overflowed with people and noise and laughter. Children ran through rooms that had witnessed their parents' childhoods. Multiple conversations happened simultaneously at the expanded dining table Douglas had built years ago specifically for such occasions. It was chaos, and it was perfect. On their anniversary, the family gathered for a formal dinner at the newly built hotel in McGill. The private room was decorated with winter greenery and candles, and as Natalie looked around the table at the family they had created, she felt almost overwhelmed with gratitude. 30 years ago, she had arrived in this town expecting death and found life. Now, that life had multiplied and expanded in ways she could not have imagined. David stood to make a toast. To my parents, who taught us that love is a choice you make every day, that commitment matters more than convenience, and that family is built through presence and participation, not just biology. Your marriage has been a foundation for all of us, a model of what partnership can be. We love you, we honor you, and we are grateful for the life you've given us. More toasts followed, each child speaking about what their parents' marriage had taught them, grandchildren offering sweet, simple statements about loving grandma and grandpa. When it was Douglas's turn, he stood slowly, his limp more pronounced now with age, and looked at his wife. 30 years ago, I was lying in a bed, broken and hopeless, when an angel walked through the door. She told me she had traveled 14 days to marry a man already buried, and I told her, in effect, I'm still standing. It wasn't elegant, but it was true. I was still standing, barely, and she chose to stand with me. Every day since, we've stood together. Through joy and sorrow, prosperity and hardship, the raising of children and the building of a community. Natalie, you are the best decision I never actually made, because you made the decision for both of us by choosing to stay. I love you today more than yesterday, but less than tomorrow. Thank you for 30 extraordinary years. Natalie could not speak through her tears, so she simply stood and kissed him, and the room erupted in applause and cheerful noise from the grandchildren who thought kissing was funny. Later, back in their quiet house after the family had dispersed to various accommodations around town, Natalie and Douglas prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of 3 decades together. You think about that telegram? Natalie asked as she brushed her hair. The one that brought me here. Sometimes. It was wrong, but somehow right. If it had been accurate, if I had actually died, someone else would have missed out on knowing you, and you would have gone back to Philadelphia and probably married someone safe and boring. Boring sounds awful, she said with a smile. I'm glad for the error. I'm glad you're stubborn. Determined, he corrected himself quickly, earning a laugh. If you had been a sensible woman, you would have left immediately. Then it's fortunate I've never been particularly sensible. She joined him in bed, settling into the familiar comfort of his arms. Determined, adventurous, perhaps a bit reckless, but never sensible. Thank God for that. They lay in comfortable silence, the house settling around them with creaks and sighs like an old friend. Outside, the December wind howled, but inside they were warm and safe, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well tended. "What do you think happens next?" Natalie asked quietly. "We're not young anymore. Our children are grown. The house is built, the community established. What do we do with the rest of our time? We keep living," Douglas said simply. "We enjoy our grandchildren, support our children, contribute to the community. We take care of each other as we age. We cherish each day we have together. That's all anyone can do, really." It sounds simple when you say it like that. The best things usually are simple at their core: love, commitment, presence. Those aren't complicated, they just require consistency. You've become philosophical in your old age. I've had a good teacher. You've been telling me profound things about rain and renewal for 30 years. Some of it was bound to sink in eventually. She laughed and kissed his cheek. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we have a house full of family to feed and entertain. Looking forward to it." And they did fill those years with grandchildren and community involvement, and the simple pleasures of a long marriage. They traveled a bit more, took the train to San Francisco to see the rebuilding after the great earthquake and fire, visited national parks that were just being established. They rode together in the evenings, attended concerts and lectures when traveling performers came to the growing town, and maintained the friendships they had built over decades. Douglas's limp grew more pronounced with age, and he eventually needed a cane for longer walks, but he remained active and engaged. Natalie's hair turned silver, and her eyesight required spectacles for reading, but her mind stayed sharp, and she continued managing the business side of their investments and Joseph's engineering projects. In 1920, they celebrated their grandchildren's achievements as several attended universities and others started businesses or careers. The world was changing rapidly, automobiles replacing horses, electricity reaching even remote places like McGill, new technologies emerging from the crucible of the Great War. But through all the change, their marriage remained a constant, evolving but fundamentally unchanged in its core commitment. One evening in the spring of 1923, 40 years after Natalie's arrival in McGill, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were in their 70s now, slowed by age but still mentally sharp, still engaged with life. The sunset painted the mountains gold, just as it always had, just as Douglas had described in his first letters. "I've been thinking," Natalie said quietly, "about that young woman who got off the stage in 1883. She was 22 years old, scared but determined, grieving a man she'd never met. I wish I could tell her it all works out, that she finds exactly what she's looking for and more. Would she believe you? Probably not. She'd think it was too good to be true. A marriage based on letters, starting with the groom half dead, building a life in a harsh desert town. It sounds improbable even living it. But it's real. We made it real through choice and commitment and a whole lot of stubbornness. Determination," she corrected, and they both laughed at the ancient joke that never quite got old. "I would tell my younger self to watch for a green-eyed woman with a stubborn streak and a kind heart. I'd tell him she's going to save his life in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Natalie said firmly. "You gave me purpose and partnership. I gave you hope and healing." It wasn't one-sided. No, it never was. That's what made it work. They sat in companionable silence as the sky darkened and stars emerged. 40 years of sunsets watched together, 40 years of conversation and silence and everything in between. It was a good life, they both knew, one worth the journey it took to find each other. As they prepared for bed that night, moving with the careful precision of aged bodies, Douglas paused in the doorway of their bedroom. "I want you to know something." "What is it?" "If I could go back and change anything, make my life easier, avoid the mind collapse, all of it, I wouldn't. Because every step, even the painful ones, led to you, to us. And I wouldn't trade a single day of our life together for an easier path that didn't include you. Natalie felt her eyes fill with tears, an increasingly common occurrence as she aged, and found herself more easily moved by emotion. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, and you've said quite a few romantic things over 40 years. I mean it, every word. I know you do, and I feel the same. I traveled 14 days to marry a man already buried and instead found a man who was still standing, who chose to keep standing with me beside him. That's a better story than any romance novel, better than any fairy tale, because it's real and it's ours. They lived several more good years together, watching McGill continue to evolve, celebrating the marriages and births of great-grandchildren, taking joy in the simple rituals of daily life. Douglas passed first, in his sleep in the winter of 1926, 43 years after the mine collapse that should have killed him, but instead became the catalyst for everything good in his life. Natalie mourned him deeply, but without bitterness, grateful for every day they had shared. She lived 3 more years, dying peacefully in the spring of 1929 at the age of 68, surrounded by her children and several grandchildren. Her last words, according to David, who held her hand at the end, were about Douglas. "Tell him I'm on my way. Tell him I chose him again." They were buried side by side in the McGill Cemetery, not far from the monument Douglas had designed for the miners lost in the collapse. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription chosen by their children, Douglas and Natalie Zimmerman. He survived. She stayed. They built a life worth living. 1851–1926 and 1861–1929. The story of the bride who came for a funeral and found a wedding became part of McGill's folklore, told and retold, embellished and simplified by turns, but always capturing the essential truth. That love, real love, is not about perfect circumstances or fairy tale meetings, but about choosing commitment over convenience, choosing partnership over perfection, choosing to stand together even when standing is difficult. Their house remained in the family for generations, and their descendants spread throughout the West, carrying with them the legacy of that improbable beginning and devoted partnership. And every generation heard the story of how their great-grandmother traveled 14 days to marry a man already buried, how their great-grandfather said, "I'm still standing," and how together they built not just a family but a testament to the power of determination, commitment, and love that chooses to remain even when circumstances suggest leaving would be easier. The letters that started it all, carefully preserved by Natalie and then by her children, resided in a special collection at the Nevada Historical Society, where researchers and romantics alike could read the words that built a foundation strong enough to last a lifetime. In those fading pages, written in 2 different hands over months of separation, the essential truth of their love story remained clear: that knowing someone's heart and mind creates a bond that physical presence only strengthens, that honesty and vulnerability are the building blocks of real intimacy, and that choosing each other, day after day, year after year, is both the simplest and most profound act of love. And so their story ended not with death but with legacy, not with separation but with the continuation of everything they had built together. In the children who inherited Douglas's engineering mind and Natalie's determination, in the grandchildren who combined both their strengths, in the great-grandchildren who never knew them but benefited from the foundation they established, their love continued. The house in McGill stood for over 100 years. The business Natalie helped build lasted 3 generations, and the example of their marriage influenced countless others who heard their story and thought, perhaps, that real love was worth working for. worth traveling 14 days for, worth choosing over and over again regardless of circumstances. Because in the end, that was what they proved. That love is not something that happens to you, but something you create through daily choice and sustained commitment. That telegrams can be wrong, but hearts are often right. That a man can nearly die and yet keep standing. That a woman can travel across a continent for a ghost and find a soulmate instead. And that together, two people with determination and faith in each other can build something beautiful even in the harshest of landscapes, something that lasts not just a lifetime but generations, a testament to the power of choosing love even when every rational argument says to turn away. Their story, improbable and impossible and absolutely true, became the story they gave to their children and their children's children. That real love requires courage, that commitment is a choice made new each day, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a journey to an ending that turns out to be a beginning instead.